Makes Me Wanna Holler by Nathan McCall. Chapter 34, A Measure of Peace. I see now why old heads tell young folks to take their time. I understand why they say, get to know people and their families before you plunge into affairs. Had I followed those conventions, I probably wouldn't have gotten hooked up so quickly with somebody so wrong for me. But I did get hooked up, and it caused me so much pain and so much time on the emotional roller coaster that to this day I haven't completely recovered. On the day Ian was born, I left the hospital reeling. I was disoriented. I needed somebody to talk to about the confusion I felt. I needed escape, a fifth of bourbon, or a cigar-sized joint. If I had those, I thought I'd get high as a kite and let the drug deaden the pain. Instead, I gassed up the car and rolled around, cruising through Atlanta's Black South Side, glancing at people walking along the streets. It dawned on me while watching them that appearances reveal very little about people. I had no sense of their travails, and they knew nothing of what I was going through. We all looked cool, in control, and on top of things. Yet, I was an emotional wreck. My self-pity at that moment was enormous. My life was more complicated than ever. Now I had two sons, two young, endangered black men, to steer through this crazy, racist world while trying to figure out how to get through it myself. I had two sons by two different women, neither of whom I was in love with or married to. And I had serious fatherhood fears haunting me. I kept wondering, how am I going to handle the responsibility of another child when I'm already having so much trouble learning to be a good father to the first? It looked bad for the home team. The complexity of the shit I was dealing with was mind-boggling. Although I didn't understand it at the time, matters of race were once again a key factor, lingering in the shadows like they always do. I had hooked up with a woman apparently desperate to nail down a brother to realize her family dreams amid widespread fears that there weren't many decent black men left. And she had cut into me at a time when I was hypersensitive about how I was perceived as a black man. Race played a key role in how I viewed my domestic situation, how I responded to Debbie's actions, and ultimately, how I got myself into deeper doo-doo while trying to clean up my act. I was dogged by racial stereotypes about irresponsible black baby makers. I didn't want others, black or white, to see me that way. And yet, on the surface, it was beginning to look like I was a Mac Daddy in a suit and tie. Paranoid, I kept my private life as secret as possible from my colleagues. Except for a very few select black folks at the paper, I didn't socialize on weekends with any of them. If my colleagues were to come to my apartment, they see that I had a live-in partner and a young child, and I felt uncomfortable with that. It wasn't the establishment way of doing things. The establishment considered such arrangements illegitimate. Also, it was extremely important to prove to myself that I didn't fit the stereotypes. I knew that I'd change, but that new birth suggested otherwise. It cast doubts in my own head. All that stuff haunted me and clung like a pit bull. Sometimes when I thought about it, it seemed that the best solution to that mess would be to legitimize things, to remain with Debbie and become a family man, to do the Ward Cleaver thing. Then my shit wouldn't appear to be so ragged. But it wasn't easy. After I lived with Debbie for several months, it became clear to me that we were two very different people whose outlooks on life, values, and goals were nothing alike. I thought she was so hung up on her family dreams that she ignored what was going on in the rest of the world. She said I was so consumed with black consciousness that I was unable to relax and enjoy the simple things in life, such as the family vibe. We had serious arguments, loud, knockdown dragouts that always went in circles and usually ended with her calling me selfish and wondering aloud why I couldn't want what she wanted in life. She'd say, "What's wrong with what I want?" And I'd say, "Nothing. There's nothing wrong with what you want in life, except that you can't force me to want what you want. It doesn't work that way. She always got to me, though, when she put it another way. Sometimes she'd say, "What's so wrong with wanting to have a family? That's the most natural thing in the world." When she said that, she struck a sore spot. After hearing the Muslims preach so much about the virtues of family, I had accepted it as a good thing. Mostly, though, when she raised that issue, it tapped into a well of doubt that I had about myself. I knew that my value system had been so screwed up when I hung on the streets that some of my natural inclinations might be out of whack. And I feared sometimes that my reluctance to form a family with Debbie was an example of my imbalance. I wonder if perhaps I should be more family oriented, and since I had a ready-made family with me, get with the program. Sometimes I tried. Sometimes I told myself, just cooperate. Maybe you'll eventually learn to like it. I'd go with Debbie to see her friends, and she and I packed up the baby and drove to North Carolina sometimes to visit her relatives. Always I felt like an actor, playing the role of warm husband and proud father to keep up a front. Lord knows I tried, but my heart wasn't in it. The heart is a stubborn thing. It don't give a shit what you tell it to do. It does what it wants, and it can't be trained to do otherwise. Although there were times when I felt I really liked Debbie, I couldn't will myself to accept as permanent the situation that I was in with her. I couldn't get my heart to cross over into love to save my life. The magic just wasn't there. Although we were an 11-hour drive away from Norfolk, Debbie's family visited so often that it seemed sometimes like they lived right around the corner. Her mother was so excited about the newborn baby that she couldn't stay away. She was happy that Debbie finally had the baby that she'd wanted, and I could see that in subtle and not so subtle ways, she was trying to move the union to the next phase, marriage. One day, when Debbie's mother was visiting, she walked over to me and said, "Nathan, now that you all have a baby, you should be thinking about getting married." I was standing in the kitchen. I said, "No, I ain't thinking about getting married." She said, "Well, if you were man enough to lay down and do what married people do, then you should be man enough to take the responsibility for it." I went off. I'm not getting married, and nobody's going to make me. Hearing my raised voice, Debbie, who had gone to the back of the apartment, rushed into the kitchen to see what was going on. When I told her, she grew quiet. That wasn't the end of the family troubles. That summer, Debbie decided to send the baby to her mother for a while. I protested. "He's too young. I thought you were supposed to keep the baby with the parents so that he could bond with them in his first few months." But it was a done deal. Debbie's mother wanted to keep the baby, and she got him. I got overruled. Then Debbie's sister came to live with us in our 2-bedroom apartment. The youngest of the 3 girls, she had just finished college. She was self-conscious and somewhat shy. Nice, but not warm. She had personality quirks like anybody else. Tensions rose between us, however, when it came to resolving those little differences that can make life hard in a crowded household. Like her unwillingness to wash our clothes along with hers when she went to do the laundry, and her insistence on taking Ian out of his crib at night when we were trying to get him used to sleeping alone. I appealed to Debbie to talk to her sister about those things, but I ended up having to do it myself. I had forgotten. They don't take sides against each other. The arguments between Debbie and me worsened over time. Then I saw a side of her I hadn't seen before. One day, we were arguing in the bedroom and she pushed a stereo speaker on me and hurt my hand. Another time, she got mad and hit me hard with a lamp. I learned through those and other experiences with Debbie that some women are as abusive in relationships as some men. It's rare to find women who will do it, but some figure they can kick your ass up and down the street and you're not going to do anything because men aren't supposed to hit women. Some know that they have the law on their side and they take full advantage of it. Debbie was one of those women. Minutes after the lamp incident, I went to Debbie's sister, who'd seen and heard it all, and I appealed to her to talk to her sister. She gave me this blank stare, which I took to mean, we're family. We don't take sides against each other. Debbie's tendency to get physical scared me. I knew I had a temper, and that if I hit her back or merely tried to protect myself, she'd call the cops. I'd get locked away, my prison record would be brought into it, and the thing could mushroom into a big old mess. I felt vulnerable, like I was in a potentially explosive situation that I couldn't control. That's when I decided to do something fast. I moved out. I found a trendy-looking apartment on Edgewood Avenue, just blocks from downtown. It was a cozy, second-story apartment with hardwood floors and wood and plate glass front door that looked over a spacious deck and provided a splendid view of the city. For the first time, I got to experience Atlanta as I had originally planned to, alone. One of my fantasies was to live a stable, responsible life as a bachelor, to get all my affairs in order, and to get on top of life without some external obstacle hampering me. For a while, I tried to pretend to myself that Debbie still didn't live in Atlanta. I got back into the market and began hanging out, hitting the happy hours to check out Atlanta's single scene. But Debbie wasn't going for that. One day, I looked out my front door and saw her standing across the street, watching me. She was just standing there, holding Ian on her hip. Another time, she showed up at my place unannounced late at night. I had company over, a lady friend I'd met. Debbie rang my apartment, but I didn't answer the intercom. She kept ringing so much that one of my neighbors must have grown impatient and buzzed her in. Once upstairs, Debbie banged on the door, loud and hard, prompting the neighbor to come into the hallway and threaten to call the law. My guest got so scared that she went and hid in the bathroom until Debbie left. That kind of blind irrationality frightened me, but it didn't stop me from dating other women. I desperately wanted to find that special someone with the right blend of intellect and worldliness, and I felt Atlanta had a lot of such women to choose from. That's when I got a better sense of the stress among black professionals in the dating scene. Black professionals in Atlanta had all the problems that I seen in Tidewater, but on a larger scale. One night, while mingling at a game party thrown by a colleague, I met Alicia. She was fine, a dark-skinned beauty with a short natural, full lips, and big, pretty eyes. She had that ethnic style about her, dangling earrings, copper bracelets, loose-fitting African garb that I love. She was intense but not solemn. She had a good sense of humor, was spiritual and cerebral, and her black identity was well intact. A school teacher, she was about to start her own business to get out of the system. We had big fun together. We go to the movies, go dancing, or sit up at my place and listen to music and talk about everything. But a couple of months or so after we started dating, she raised a commitment issue. Nathan, I think it's time for us to talk about where we're going. I responded in the dumb, evasive way men often do. How will we know where we're going until we get there? Then I need to know what it is we have. You know what we have. We have a fine relationship. I need something more. I'm not sure I can give more. Anything more and we'll be engaged. The truth was, I wanted to give more, but I couldn't. I felt obligated to Debbie and Ian in a way I couldn't explain to Alicia or to myself. I felt that obligation so strongly that I felt like I was sneaking around, even when Debbie and I had formally split. Unable to get a commitment from me, Alicia called off the relationship. Over time, that developed into a disturbing pattern with me. I met nice, intelligent sisters I liked a lot. We dated, but when they wanted to take the relationship to another level, I got scared and moved on. That nomadic life got frustrating, especially when I went out with the wrong woman. Eventually, I realized I may have missed out on something special with Alicia, and watching those people I knew who seemed to enjoy family stability made me think seriously about settling down. I even started feeling guilty about enjoying so much freedom and wondered, Maybe I gave up too soon on Debbie and my son. I had often wondered if I moved too fast and given up too soon on Yvette. The divorce from her was one of those experiences that taught me something about myself that I didn't much like. I had invested a lot of energy in learning to believe in myself, but never quite learned how to believe in others. Having left Debbie, I felt as if I continued an ugly pattern that I needed to break. But Debbie, I thought, couldn't offer me a healthy relationship. This was the same woman who'd thrown lamps and overturned furniture during arguments. Yet I found myself willing to submerge the memory of all that when hounded by guilt. And I started rationalizing, trying to convince myself that our relationship hadn't been all that bad and that it could get better if given a chance. Despite all the problems we had, I still thought Debbie was a nice person and she was still attractive to me. I started spending more time with her again, testing the water to see if the relationship deserved another shot. Sometimes I'd spend the night with her, then lay low at my own place a few days and assess things. Then, one day in December 1984, about a month after I started seeing Debbie again, she told me she was pregnant. Life has a way of making a liar out of you. When I had gotten out of prison, I told myself there was nothing I couldn't handle. Now I was forced to admit that this was too much for me. I now know how it feels to go for stretches of time that are unaccounted for. It's entirely possible that I went into shock. All I know is that I ranted on endlessly, refusing to accept the truth of what she said. Why, I asked her, did you offer to use the pill as our method of birth control, then neglect to take it regularly? No way. No way. There is no way this is happening again. How could it be true? I could halfway accept the possibility of an accidental pregnancy once, but twice, I told Debbie? There is no excuse for a 32-year-old woman to accidentally get pregnant twice in the 1980s. This means you are either terribly stupid or terribly manipulative, and I don't want to be associated with a woman who is either of those. I exploded so powerfully that it frightened me. I cursed her and called her everything but a child of God. I wanted her to abort, but she said right off, I have no intentions of aborting. For weeks, life stood still. I tried everything. I told her that she would either abort or have no support from me. I even tried to get her to sit down with a few couples we knew and discuss this thing rationally, get some objective feedback. She wouldn't budge. She wanted another child. Depressed, I took some time off from work and went to Texas to visit a woman friend and think. For a full 10 days, I stayed at my friend's apartment while she was away at work. I jogged, read, pondered my life, and the cycle of insanity I seemed unable to shake. I wondered if I was addicted to turmoil and thought again of a deep-rooted fear. The fear that I was programmed to fail, that no matter how close I came to forging a successful life, I'd eventually find a way to blow it. When I returned to Atlanta, I called Jim, my old mentor from prison, to get advice. Jim told me that he was dealing with the exact same thing. A woman he was dating had gotten pregnant. Jim was furious. He said the same thing that I had, that the woman had assured him she was on the pill and that he suspected her negligence was intentional. Despite all his anger and all his suspicions, Jim went on and got married for the sake of the child. On August 19th, 1985, I went to the delivery room, put on a hospital gown, mask, and sterile gloves, and waited for the C-section to begin. The doctor began cutting, hacking at Debbie's stomach as if sawing her in half. Blood gushed and squirted everywhere. A lightheaded sensation came over me, and my legs felt weak. It was the first time in my life that I had nearly fainted. It was also the first time I witnessed the wonder of a baby being born. Doctors inserted an instrument into Debbie's abdomen to widen the passageway. The obstetrician reached in and wrenched out this tiny, rubbery-looking body that resembled a bloody, mangled Cabbage Patch doll. He slapped its behind, and it gasped and gulped desperately for air. Wriggling, thrashing wildly, Then it let out a deep, agonizing, convulsing wail. The doctor glanced at it, looked at me, and announced, "It's a girl." He wiped her off and handed her to me. Two emotions shot through my head when I took that girl into my arms. First, there was fear. A girl. Oh shit. The fellas and I ran trains on girls. How would I help get her through that? I was scared because I knew that a daughter would be subject to the insanity of men. White men would try to exploit her. Brothers would abuse her. Most sisters caught hell coming and going. As Zora Neale Hurston once said, black women are the mules of the world. Gushing love was the second emotion that swept through me. I held my newborn daughter, looked into her eyes, and melted like butter. I've heard much about the chemistry between fathers and daughters. None of it prepared me for what I felt. All of a sudden, none of my troubles had meaning. None of her impending challenges mattered. All the stress and hassles of the past 9 months seemed worth the experience of that baby girl, and I was suddenly grateful to her mother for protecting her life. Since Debbie had named Ian, my son, I insisted on naming the girl, and I made sure she wasn't named after anybody white. I named her Maya, after the writer Maya Angelou. I gave her a Swahili middle name, Nala, which means one who succeeds. Every time I think I've seen it all and experienced all that this life has to offer, I get hit with a new experience that thrusts me into a totally new reality. Today, I became the father of a baby girl. She is beautiful. Now I face the challenge of raising her, a black female, in this sexist, racist world. What a charge. Meeting the challenge is going to require some serious reorganizing of values, time, money, and energy. August 19th, 1985. After Maya's birth, pressure to marry Debbie mounted. We now had 2 children out of wedlock, an extremely embarrassing and uncomfortable situation for me. Debbie's mother added to my anxieties, suggesting that I ask for her daughter's hand and prodding for an explanation of why I had not already made that move. I told her because I don't want to. Beyond that, there was an even greater reason for me to resist. Besides the pregnancies, there were several things about Debbie that I found deeply disturbing and dangerous. Then, Debbie's mother turned to my parents for sympathetic ears. She told Mama that Debbie's father was so upset over his unmarried daughter having 2 children that it was affecting his health. From time to time, she'd ask my mother, "Why won't Nathan marry Debbie? Does he think he's too good for her?" It worked to some degree. My mother also began broaching the topic whenever we talked. One day, while talking with me on the phone, she said out of the blue, "Maybe you should go on and get married." There weren't many people who could make me change my mind about such things. But my mother meddled in my affairs so rarely that I listened whenever she ventured to say something about my personal life. I paid attention and thought about what she said while trying to figure out what to do. One of the other people who helped me figure things out, I'm sure, has no idea how his words affected me. His name was Charlie, and he was a Georgia good old boy from way back. He spent much of his journalism career at the Journal-Constitution and was preparing to retire. For some reason, Charlie took to me. Maybe it was because we sat so close. My desk was set directly across from his, so close that if either of us raised his head from his work, he looked right into the other's eyes. Or maybe it was because he considered me one of the more tame blacks that he could tolerate. Like a lot of Deep South whites, Charlie always felt he was under siege. The world was closing in on the South, and everybody, complaining blacks and liberal whites, was threatening his precious way of life. I think he hated liberal whites more than he hated anybody. When one of those liberal whites walked across the newsroom, Charlie would look at him contemptuously, lean over toward me, and whisper, with his mouth twisted sideways, "Nathan, I bet you that guy's a fucking queer." Clearly he was homophobic, but beyond that he was extremely nice. Whenever he made one of his frequent trips to the cafeteria for coffee, he'd rise, pull his belt up as high as it would go around his round gut, and say, "Nathan, I'm going downstairs. Can I get you a cup of coffee or a soda?" If I said yes, he'd insist on paying. I didn't know how to deal with this guy. I didn't know whether to ignore his offensive slurs or challenge his narrow views. Sometimes when he made remarks to me, I just pretended not to hear, but he never seemed to catch the hint. Around the time I was considering the whole issue of marriage to Debbie, our newspaper ran a front page story revealing that 75% of the black children then being born in the nation were born out of wedlock. It was another one of the many stories suggesting that blacks in America were coming apart. I slipped into a blue funk that day at work because I was included in that statistic. I dreaded the thought that Charlie or anyone else in that office, white or black, would find out that I had brought 3 out of wedlock children into the world. Charlie came in that morning, sat down across from me, squinted his eyes and said, "Nathan, me and my wife were discussing that story about the number of blacks born out of wedlock, and we couldn't believe it. I always thought blacks were very religious people." I was livid. I was mad enough to leap across the desk and punch him in his face. Instead, I held my peace, got up, and stormed off. Why do white folks always stand in judgment of us? Why do they always take such a one-dimensional view of things? Every time I saw him after that story ran, I felt convicted and conflicted and determined to get that monkey off my back. Charlie's words stung me sufficiently to make me consider doing my part in proving white folks wrong. Maybe I should get married, like everybody says. For the second time in several years, the views of some unsuspecting white person figured in on one of the most important decisions of my life. Charlie's words had nearly the same impact as those of the woman who would come into my office in Virginia and scared the hell out of me with her abortion speech. It was Debbie who finally forced me to make up my mind. She told me one day that she planned to move back home to Norfolk. "Things aren't working out for me here," she said. It took all of 1 second for the meaning of that to sink in. It meant I'd be separated from my children again. I'd likely be a stranger to them, just like my father, JL, was a stranger to me, just like I was near a stranger to Monroe. Although I flew Monroe to Atlanta each summer, it still seemed inadequate. That settled it. I told myself I couldn't let that happen with Ian and Maya. I'd have to get married. Marriage would resolve a lot of problems nagging me. Asking Debbie to marry me called for the same desperate resolve that I had used on the streets to summon the will to bash somebody's head, enter a dark house, or hold up a store. I would go through with it and prevent myself from thinking about it or changing my mind. I proposed to her in a bland, matter-of-fact way that must have given me away. She sought reassurance that I was serious. "Does that mean you love me?" I paused. "Yes, I love you." It was a lie, and I suspected she knew it. It's like the woman who asks the morning after you have taken her to bed on the first date, "Do you care about me?" You say anything you think she wants to hear, and she accepts it, not because she believes it, but because she wants to believe it. Debbie wanted to get married. She wanted to believe. I called friends and told them the news. They congratulated me, but none expressed joy. A few even tried to warn me that Debbie might not be the right person. Some urged me to reconsider, which annoyed me because I knew they were right. But I figured peace of mind was worth more than any hardships I might face. The only way to get peace of mind was to at least try to do what was right. After the proposal, Debbie and I got into an argument that I never thought I'd have. When I suggested that she either keep her maiden name or use a hyphenated combination of both hers and mine, she got mad. She insisted on dropping her maiden name and taking on mine. I don't remember the explanation she gave, but I remember during the argument scratching my head and saying, "Wait a minute, I thought I was doing something good by suggesting that you maintain part of your family identity. I thought a lot of women nowadays consider that the progressive thing to do. But she made it clear who she wanted to be. It would be Mrs. McCall. In the time leading up to the wedding, I called all the ladies I had been involved with and told them my plans. I had lunch with Alicia, who looked at me sadly and shook her head. It's strange, she said. I try not to be manipulative because it's the wrong thing to do, but it seems that the women who manipulate win all the time. I was so scared I might change my mind that I set the wedding date smack in the middle of the congressional primary race between John Lewis and Julian Bond, which I was covering for the Journal-Constitution. White folks at work couldn't understand why I would take time off in the middle of such an important campaign, but I didn't care. I was on a mission that was critical for me. In a few months before the wedding, I moved out of my apartment and back in with Debbie and the children and returned to life in the fog. Debbie and her mother did all the planning. It was to be a Christian ceremony conducted by Debbie's mother's pastor. The wedding would be held in Norfolk Botanical Gardens. I went along with whatever they said, just like Debbie's father would have done. Just tell me where to stand and what to say. It all felt so strange on that June wedding day in 1986. Among the guests, especially those in my party, was a subtle air of cynicism. I felt people searching my eyes, looking, I guess, for signs of fear and doubt. If they looked closely, it was more likely they saw relief. At that same time, standing there at the altar, I couldn't help thinking that Debbie and her mother had defeated me, that I was possibly on my way to becoming a carbon copy of Debbie's old man. But I refused to let such thinking get in my way. I was on a mission, driven by a purpose that was larger than them. I kept looking at Ian and Maya and thinking, this is good for them. This legitimizes things. I stood where I was told and repeated the vows as the minister prompted. When it was over, Debbie and I kissed and were legally joined. I felt nothing that remotely resembled joy, but that didn't matter. Debbie looked happy. Her mother looked happy. I paid my dues to the two children I had brought into the world. Maybe, I thought, I will find a measure of peace. Okay, we've made it to the end of this chapter. And wow, Nathan has done it to himself again. One of the things that I want y'all to keep in mind is that ultimately, life comes down to the choices that we make. Now, you have all the freedom in the world to make your choices, but you can't escape the consequences of those choices. Nathan being with Debbie, getting her pregnant in the first place, these are all choices that he made. Like, he chose to have unprotected sex with her. He chose not to get to know her well enough. And he chose to, rely on her to keep up with the birth control. Not once, but twice. I don't do the domestic violence thing. Like, you hit me with a lamp or turning the speaker over on my foot. Yeah, I wouldn't play that. In my opinion, I think he made the right decision separating himself from her. But I wonder, how did she find out where he stayed and what room he was in for her to just show up at his place like that? Something else I'm thinking about is that Nathan could have benefited from some therapy, because he does have a lot of mental hangups when it comes to what white people think. That's something that's going to be a detriment to anybody's life when you're living your life and making your decisions based on what they think. Now, I know we've been through this whole brainwashing, mind control program here in America and throughout the world as black people. But the war is for you to take back control of your mind. That's the most important thing that you can do. And not for nothing, I actually have an ebook that I wrote. It's called Free Your Mind to Have Peace of Mind. I wrote that at a time where I was noticing that it was so many people walking around and on the internet who just seemed not to be at peace. And I knew it was because they weren't in control of their own mind. So I'm going to leave a link for that ebook in the description of this video. You guys check it out. Let me know what you think. But I think I put some good steps. Well, I know I put some good steps in there that help you to take back control of your mind to where you can make decisions with a more clear head. You know, this idea of being forced into marriage because of the situation that you put yourself in, you know, I don't know if that's a good way to start off a marriage. But I knew in my life I was determined not to be forced into a marriage. Like, I took my time. As of this video airing, I'm engaged now to the love of my life. But that's because I want to be. I want to be with this woman and spend my life with her. There was nothing forcing me into that situation. Like, we don't have a child. There's no child on the way. It's something that we both want to do. And I had to make that conscious decision, you know, to not put myself in vulnerable situations with women in my past. Because like Nathan said, that's a hell of a responsibility to be forced into, especially if you don't really want to do it. You know, as an unmarried man, just looking from the outside in, I believe it's best to step into that situation with a clear head and with the feeling like you're doing this of your own accord, like you're not being forced into it. But anyway, you guys let me know what you think. Remember to check out that link I'm going to leave to my ebook, Free Your Mind to Have Peace of Mind. And I'll see you guys in the next chapter. Peace.